All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 7. Hope everyone's doing great, enjoying the rain. Uh, I had to walk across campus in the rain. That was okay, but it felt pretty good. So let me, let's see. What do I need to do? Whoops. Someone was in. Oh, Dylan. All right. All right. A couple people missing, but we'll get started. Let me get my lecture here in a second so I can share my screen. All right. Here's 7. I'm still getting organized, so a little bit behind today. But we have a kind of a short day, so if you looked at module 7, it's only got two topic sections. So give you a little bit of a break, just a little bit, and then all right. Let me make sure I get everyone recorded as here. Looks like I'm missing a couple. And you all can hear me okay. I know I'm mumbling, but you can hear me okay, right? Okay, thank you. One more check of the attendance, and then I'll get started. Now, while I'm doing this, were there any questions on the? Oh, Diana has a question about joins. Okay, go ahead, Diana.
Yeah, thanks. I actually had a few. I was wondering, first of all, like with the inner and outer join, couldn't you I guess I am just surprised there's like the two because you can just flip the order of the tables and anything that is I mean, I meant to say left and right outer join. Sorry.
Right, right.
Left and right can just be flipped and then they're the same basically.
That's correct.
Okay.
There's some redundance there, especially in these simple database schemas. Obviously, basically, you could flip it based on the order of the tables, and you get the same result. And that's
Okay.
why it can be confusing. And yeah, it's one of those things that when you have more complicated relational database structures, it makes more sense with joins. But on these simple samples, yes, you can just simply flip the tables, get the same result.
Okay, okay. Just want to make sure I was clear on that. And then the other thing I was wondering is if you just say outer join, does it default to like a left outer join or
No, no. And in Oracle, you have to indicate one of the three, left, right, or full. It will not default. It may seem like it defaults to the left,
Mhm.
but yeah, you want to indicate. I think this version of Oracle Developer, it may run, but most relational database systems will give you an error.
Okay, you're right. I think I just tried it and I got an error, so I don't know why I think I thought of that question earlier in the week and I thought it
Okay.
worked, but I guess it didn't. And then one other question is are there any when I was doing the homework, I was like overthinking like the categories for each of the problems when it said like inner versus outer. I was like, well, I could do both of these with like an outer or whatever. So I was wondering if there's any I don't know, like that you can't really do with anything else. Like,
No, no, not. Then you'll find that that's more prevalent or more almost obvious or not obvious.
Mhm.
There's not, I guess what I'm trying to say, there's really not a default way or a standard way to perform some of these joins. And you can do them. There's several different ways to complete those. I guess that's what you're asking.
Okay, okay. That's why I think on one question I did like two different screenshots because I was
Right.
overthink it, but yeah.
I, s-
Okay.
I saw that, and overthinking is okay, but don't let it bog you down as far as your results, especially in SQL, because there's so many different ways to do everything. So,
Okay, cool. Yeah, I also got a little confused about how like using and on almost
uh-huh.
seemed interchangeable to me. And I think
Yes.
that's okay. I also switched that up with different initial join clauses and they
Yep.
both work. So,
That another part of the redundancy of SQL. Uh,
oh,
so using and usually you use one or the other. If you don't have a natural join where you don't have to indicate the
mhm,
column that you're joining on, then you're specifically indicating what you're setting, what the conditions are you setting for the join.
mhm.
You can use either using or on. They're both kind of synonymous as far as their usage. So
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thanks for the questions. Very good questions. Um, and generally, I think everyone did pretty well. I didn't see any major problems with the homework or the quiz. There's um, a couple that, well, spread across the board, a couple where um, there may have been some issues, but generally everyone did pretty well. I didn't see any major um, I guess setbacks on either of those particular components of the module. So we're going to move right ahead to our next challenge or section. So let me set this up and then share my screen. All right. Okay. Screen number 2. All right. Can everyone see my beautiful Oracle Oracle Academy CIS 119DO? And getting thumbs up. Now you probably can't see it, but now you can see it. Okay, so let's move right into week 7, October 13th. I do want to say, well, I think I saved it for the last slide, but in this module, we only have 2 topics. So it's kind of an easier week, but the 2 topics are pretty another level of functions with SQL that can be useful. And I like some of Diana's questions. Remember, there's several ways to accomplish these tasks, and I'm actually looking for what you can apply as far as your learning. And if you investigate the practice queries, there's truly several approaches. And essentially, this is the scenario as long as you arrive at the right result, yeah, and you don't get an error. Obviously, that's a good thing. So, all right. So our first topic, 7.1, are group functions. We've had other types of functions, but we're going to move into group functions. And group functions, um, basically, we're going to look at the 7 that are mostly used, standard deviation, variance, not so much in SQL, but yeah, you statisticians or statistic-minded individuals may recognize those, and yes, you can run those particular types of group functions on a relational database. So primarily, we want to look at sum, and that should kind of make sense. Average, count, min, and max, and then the standard deviation, variance, statistical analysis functions. We're going to construct and execute a SQL query using group function, excuse me. Construct and execute a group function that operates only with numeric. Oh, I guess I did cut it off there. All right, so what is the purpose? So what if you're writing an article for your school newspaper and you wanted to know the average age of students at your school? You could ask each student and add these numbers up and divide by the number. Yeah, we all know how to take an average, but that would take time. And probably if you had 1,000 students, that would be, yeah, you probably would say, I'm not doing this. But and what if you had an immediate deadline, you're rushing around, working up a sweat? You probably don't want to do that. Fortunately, um, And then to continue this scenario, what if the student's date of birth was in the database? It would be easy then. We would wait. What was our problem here? Average age. Oh, so if we had their date of birth, obviously we can just go there because we've learned the date functions and just calculate that. Although that would take time too, based on their birth date and today's date, etc. So we're going to bypass all that consideration as far as the process and learn how to use group functions that we can run on a particular column to essentially, what am I trying to say? Complete a scenario like that or satisfy the requirements of a scenario, such as that was indicated in our little purpose scenario. So group functions, what are they? So in SQL, the following group functions can operate on a whole table or a specific group of rows. So whole table or subset of the table. And each function returns one result. So you run the group function, you get one result. And you're probably thinking, is that what we want? Yes. So look at something like average, count, min, which is minimum, max, which is maximum, sum, then variance and standard deviation. Yes, I do need to highlight those because in case you're performing some statistical analysis and you need to know the standard deviation. We won't go into those into detail, but you can run those among others, but these 7 we're going to look at first. Primarily the 5 are more important. All right, so let's look at an example of how these group functions work. So here's a very simple query to our employees table. So we're just selecting salary from employees, and we know it's going to return 20 rows, and they're not in any particular order. But so if we wanted to run, let's say, who makes the most in our little company, we can run the max function. And you see the syntax here, select max salary function column, right, from employees. And basically the one result is going to calculate calculate the average of all the rows, and we will know that basically that's King, and King makes 24,000 a month. Yeah, I used to. So that is the max. So the max will use the column and will store basically the maximum value of that row. All right, pretty straightforward, right? That's how group functions work. Just remember you're expecting a single result and it will satisfy your requirement. And the same with min, just the opposite. It'll return the minimum salary, which is 2,500. And the syntax, select min salary from employees. Nice little calculation, nice and easy without too much of a headache. And of course, we can run the other functions. Let's run the sum, how much we're paying all our employees per month. So it's going to sum up all 20 rows and will return one result, 175,500. And we can also do the average, which is $8,775 a month. Group functions, pretty useful. And if you think about it, that, if you're looking for certain criteria, these are the functions that you would run to satisfy that particular requirement. And the last one, well, one of the last, but you can also count. If you want to count the number of entries of that particular column, you use the function count. That makes sense, right? Count. And we already know there's 20 rows, but let's say we have 20,000 rows, of course. You want to use the count. So you see the syntax here, count in your column name. And then basically your select statement looks like that. Now the variance and standard deviation, if you're interested, it will return a complex number. And basically, do you remember what the variance is? I think I do mention this. So this is, here, I actually listed, that stores the numeric data to calculate the spread of data around the mean. I know you're really wanting to know that, but you do use that in statistical analysis. And yes, 3 million or 32 million. So it's quite a spread around the mean if you really want to know what that stands for. So in my example, so for example, if the average grade for the class on a test is 82%, and the score ranges from 40 to 100%, the variance of the score would be greater than if the range, yeah. So there's my explanation. That's your statistical explanation of variance and how you would actually explain variance. I was not really that, I love numbers, but I hated the statistics. So there you go. And then standard deviation is very similar. This is the measure of spread of data. So basically, you run that function, the syntax is the same, and this complex number. And essentially, for two sets of data with approximately the same mean, the greater the spread, the greater the standard deviation. I know that's giving you a headache. You really don't want to know about standard deviation. You want to get back to SQL. But I thought I would provide a general meaning of those two, but they are functions. They are group functions in your relational database experience. All right, let's quickly move from that. Yes, the where clause is always useful, but you cannot use a group function in a where clause. So remember, the where clause is primarily for filtering, and it would be nice if you could do something like what's indicated here. Select last name, first name from employees where salary is equal to the, well, why would you do that? I mean, that's kind of a odd way of figuring out. You just run the minimum salary. But so anyway, the point here is that you can't use a group function. You can't run a group function in the where clause, right? Please remember that. You get an actual error. A group function is not allowed here. It's just not allowed in the where clause, but you can use it in many, many other ways. And group functions are pretty straightforward. So let's say we want to, another example of the min. So select min, life expectancy at birth from that WF countries table. So the minimum life expectancy within the table is 32.62 years. Wow, that's pretty short life expectancy, but yeah. I'm well beyond that, so I wonder what country that is. Anyway, that's a tangent. All right, another example. These are just a bunch of examples. It's like, now you can use min with alpha columns because basically the order is A through Z, right? So from A is the less or the minimum amount, Z would be the max amount, and that's how you would phrase or how you would interpret that particular part of using the min function. Is that necessary? Well, you could probably use something like or some other ways to find like the first country, and there's other functions too, but that's why we get Anquilla from this particular example. And then you can also use it for dates. So the earlier the date, there is essentially in your date column is the one that's returned if you use the min. And so our earliest date as far as higher is June 1787. So those are all min functions on different data types, from numbers to strings, to varchar, to chars, to dates. Any questions about that? And does it make sense? It probably does. I'm thinking we're following it just okay. All right, let's look at the max function. So max is just the opposite. So the highest life expectancy in that countries is 83.51. I'm getting pretty close to that. So I think it's about my time to go. But and then max for strings, the highest as far as the alpha is Western Sahara, and then dates, the latest higher date is January 2000. So, and that's an example of max. It's truly the opposite of min, or it returns the other end of the spectrum as far as min. All right. And some should make sense. It's the column and basically this is one of the functions that you want to use on a numeric column. and it just basically, it will sum the values of that column. So we're looking at the number, the sum of the area. There's area stored in this WF countries table. We're looking at the sum of the areas in region ID equal 29, and that's much. I don't know if that's yards or feet or miles, but anyway, that's a summation of the area. And you can sum salary, and we're using the where clause. Remember, our group function cannot be in a where clause, and we're going to learn different ways to run these functions. But yeah, this is the sum of the salary and department ID equal 90. That should make sense, right? All right. And remember those other functions like round and trunk. Yes, you can create these embed, well, these sub functions. So here, this first example, we're selecting the average area, this particular region. Now we're rounding a particular area to 2 digits. Remember, hopefully you haven't forgotten that, of average salary. And in this particular department, so we know that it's rounded to 19,333. I think that's the executive department. So that's why the salary is so high. So yes, it's once again, average is used on numeric data only as far as our purposes. And so is sum. So that is kind of common sense. So I don't think I need to iterate that too much. All right. So those are the numeric functions. So that we're dealing with. So we had the first multi-data type functions. That's the max and min and the count. And then our numeric functions, which are the sum and the average. Does that make sense to everyone so far before we get into nulls? Yay. All right. So the one thing about group functions that you have to be aware of, group functions ignore null values. This is actually a pretty big thing now. There was a time in the whole development of your relational database where nulls were always a problem, but in the internal system, the group functions will ignore null values, and it'll give you, depending upon what you're asking for, and you do have to be very careful running an average. And you have several null values like the commission percentage. So you would think that this average would account. So who could tell me, what are we averaging these 4 values with this value? Does that look like the average of these 4 values, this 0.2125, 0.2, 0.3, 0.2, and 0.1? It should be, because the group function is ignoring the null values. So it is the average of these 4 values. Now, I do want to stress that, because you may be thinking, well, that's, you have 20 employees, so it's going to, remember, null is not defined. So that's why group functions will ignore it, because if it's not defined, so your accuracy is higher when it's not considering any. So the whole idea is that it's very useful now when you're trying to calculate something that of a column that has a lot of null. Just please remember that. All right. So you can run more than one group function on a particular column, as long as you indicate the function and then your parentheses and then the column. You can run as many as you want. If we wanted the max salary and the min salary and of the minimum employee, I wouldn't do it that way, but so because this is going to be one employee. Well, I guess, why would we do a min employee ID? I'm not sure why that example was slated that way. I would probably want the min and max of, we're just talking about the one department, but why do we have min employee minimum? So we want to know the lowest employee ID in that department. Okay, fair enough. That makes sense. So 103, and the employee that's making we don't know if that's 103, but the employee that's making the minimum amount is 4,200. The employee that's making the maximum amount, or the maximum amount of salary made by the employee in that department, I should say this right, is 9,000. So that's a very odd example, but yes, this is just illustrating you can run multiple functions in your select statement, even on the same column. So more than one group function, depending on what remember, each of these will return one result. And that I did want to re-illustrate that. Does that make sense to everyone, that query? This is check for understanding. Yay, okay, cool. All right, so there's some rules for group function, and please, these can drive you nuts if you're not really paying attention to these rules. Okay, the first rule, group functions ignore no, we know that. They cannot be used in the where clause. Min, max, and count can be used on any data type. Sum, average, variance, and standard deviation can only be used on numeric data types. Remember that. Min, max, count, any. Sum, average, and I forgot to make those dark. Variance and standard deviation only on numeric. All right. And our terminology, group functions, average, count, max, min, standard, dev, sum, and variance. See, pretty straightforward. Not a lot of hoorah and dragging on and that. So, but group functions are very useful. And as we move from this to other aspects of how you can use group functions in your reporting, et cetera, it becomes a little bit more glamorous. All right. So now we're going to move on to the next section, basically count, distinct, and NVL. I phrase this in a way, count is specific to a certain aspect when it comes to groups, and then distinct, because you need to know your distinct values, and in NVL, the whole handling nulls. So I'm leading to something here that's very important with these particular functions. So bear with me, please. So we're going to construct an SQL query using count, use distinct and NVL functions with group functions. And here's the key here. There's some specific things that you should be aware of for those particular functions along with group functions. All right, so why do we need this? Aggregating or grouping together. Remember that terminology, you will see that later. Data using SQL functions enables you to calculate, cumbersome problems. You remember the example to count all the students is a daunting task. So you can, there's just not enough hands, blah, 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 to accomplish this manually, depending if you're on a huge campus or even just CGCC, there's enough students on the community college campus that some of that will, it can be a daunting task. So SQL can easily, as you just learned, process these, group scenarios pretty easily. So count, we saw this before, just an iteration. This returns the number of non-null values in the column, right? And you can do this, select count job ID, and we know that there's 20 employees. Straightforward. 20 rows of employees. Well, what about commission percentage? So if you run a query, we know that there's only 4 employees that receive commission percentage, basically in sales. So if we run the query for the count, it will only return 4 rows. So count commission percentage. So that gives you the accuracy, and we know that that's our expected result. And so it should not be an issue because we know that there's only 4 employees that receive commission percentage. So it's kind of a reiteration of that whole scenario. And the reason being is that null can sometimes be a problem. And essentially, if we're wanting to count, just for example, and you probably won't want to do this, but if we wanted to count the number of employees using the commission percentage, then we would have a problem because it would return 4. But if we wanted to use the count function to return all rows, no matter what the column is, we can use the wildcard star, just like it's indicated here, count star, and will always count the number of rows in the table. So if you wanted an indication of the number of rows, this is the way that you would use this function in your select statement. So select count star, and it doesn't really matter if there's nulls, it will return the number of rows. All right. So for example, find out how many employees were hired before that particular June 1st, 1996. We can use this, like count star from employees, or hire date is less than that. And we see that 9 employees. Fun. And of course, you can use an alias and all that fun stuff. Right, distinct has its very important usage. Basically, this keyword is used to return non-duplicate values or combinations of non-duplicate values. And that's a very important kind of extension of distinct, because if you want to look for any, like, and just to give you a kind of a high level example, if you have a lot of individuals in your organization named Jones, you probably want to combine first and last name. But so that's kind of a high level example. Well, let's take a look at this. So without distinct, if we select job ID from employees, we will get, some copies because there's several employees that are IT. In IT, there's several VPs in advertising, I suppose, several sales reps, several stock clerks. So this does not give us an idea of how many jobs we have in our company. So then we would use the distinct and it will return all the unique jobs. So we only have 12 from accounting, manager, VP, president, etc. Does that make sense to everyone, how that's used? And please notice the syntax of where distinct is placed. It's another function. It can be useful, and you'll see this a lot when you go through the practice exercise. All right. Let's see, what am I illustrating here? So when selecting more than one column, the query will return non-duplicate combinations of the select column. So we have distinct job ID, comma, department ID. So it's going to look at the combination of the columns and return all the distinct, even this sales rep with null, that's a combination. So it's going to return that. So it's returning all the distinct, all the unique values of the combination of the two columns. Now that can sometimes be confusing. Does that make sense to everyone? I think I have some. All right, and then notice that no duplicate. So if you look top to bottom between the two columns, you notice there's no duplicates of that combination. And I tried to illustrate that because you have sales rep here, sales rep there, but one's 80, one's null, and so on. So that's where it can get a little confusing, but just please remember that. All right. So the keyword distinct can be used with all group functions. So here I'm doing select salary from employees where department ID is 90, and we have salary. This is the salary in the executive. And so if we use distinct, the two statements produce different results. Where is it? I confused this. So where did I put it? Oh, so I'm using this query with these two group functions. So the sum of the salary without distinct, and it basically adds all three, right? So we get 58,000, but sum and distinct, sum of the distinct salary, then it's only going to add 24,000 and 17,000, so we get 41,000. Does that make sense to everyone? I know I kind of went through that in an odd way, but that, you can always use functions within functions as long as it's define a value. So why, you're probably asking, why would we need that? We probably would not need the distinct there. Because we do have two employees that are getting paid 17,000, probably would want the sum of the salaries as far as our executive. But anyway, that's another usage of distinct. You can actually add it within a function, like a group function. That's the key here. Okay. All right, distinct and count. When using distinct with a group function, such as count, the result set will return the number of So if you use count distinct job IDs, we know we have 12, and you can actually see that. And So how many different jobs are assigned to employees? Yeah, there are 12. But if we look at salaries, so it's just looking at salaries, this is the different salaries in our employees table, and there's 18 different salaries. So yeah, so 18 different salaries and 12 different jobs. So some of the jobs have different salaries associated with them, etc. So that's depending on what your scenario is, that's how you would form that group function with distinct. All right. Does that make sense? Thumbs up. Questions? Thumbs up. I like seeing that. All right, cool. NVL. Who remembers what NVL does? It's basically a way to handle nulls, right? You can use NVL with group functions. So, for example, if you wanted to know the average number of customers' orders served each day, could be used to judge how many. All right, let me start over. Knowing the average number of customer orders served each day could be used to judge how much food to order each month, right? You probably want to do that. So some days the restaurant is closed and no customers are served, but the owner has found that computing the average by including these days closed is better indicator than just counting the days with customers. And that's a general business rule if you want to think about that. I mean, you would think that you want to exclude those days because you don't need food on those days, but it is, if you know anything about the business model, especially restaurants, it is a better way to consider as far as ordering because you have to order so much for flux and all that. But I'm not going to get into that. But if you look at something like, and this is where I want to illustrate commission percentage. So previously we know that this is truly the average of the 4 columns for commission percentage. But let's say we want to kind of get an idea, of, I guess I didn't illustrate that, of, what if we use, and I'm trying to formulate a pretty good scenario for this. If we wanted to know essentially not just the average of those 4 employees, but the average if everyone else was considered zero in their commission percentage, which they are, what would the average look like? So, and this is why they're null. And this is kind of a usage of NVL. They may not be useful, but if we read an average of NVL and substituted all the nulls, remember what NVL does, it substitutes the nulls with an actual value. We're going to substitute the nulls. If you run this query, we'd get all zeros for the nulls and the regular 4 values of the commission percentage. And then if we run the average of that, of course, it's much smaller, right? Now, you're probably asking, how can I use that? Well, is this a better indicator of commission percentage across the company? And depending upon how you look at it, but what I want you to note is that it's a substantial value difference between the actual average of the employees receiving commission percentage and an average that we can calculate by employees that are not receiving commission percentage, meaning setting them equal to 0 and then having the regular numbers in there. So that's kind of the gist around this whole illustration here. Is it useful? The restaurant model probably makes more sense, but that would be a little bit more complicated because you're tying this average or this group function to something like food ordering. So, and we don't really have an example that we can illustrate clearly there, but just note that NVL can be used. I guess that's the idea here. NVL can be used with a group function and it won't cause any problems, but it will considerably change the results. And that's kind of the lesson here. I often wonder about the usefulness of this, other than just illustrating the substantial difference. Probably a company is not going to run or consider, well, I don't think so. Without getting too drawn into the weeds on this or overthinking it, how would it come to use this? I mean, what would this number represent? Does anyone have a comment about that before we finish? We know that this is the average, but this is something else. Would this be, a company-wide, illustration of possible permission percentage. But anyway, something to think about. I'm not going to harp on it, but it's just the fact that be very careful what you're expecting as far as your results, and then what you're calculating in these group functions. Remember, you're going to have to interpret that if some manager reads that and say, that doesn't really seem right, what happened here. So, all right, let's move ahead. So our terminology for these, and we will continue with group functions, so don't lose what you've learned. Remember, the term aggregate just means grouping, and you really need to be aware of that, and then count, and then count distinct, and then distinct, and then NVL. Pretty straightforward. So believe it or not, that's all that I'm going to cover as far as the mod, but I do want to remind you that our midterm is coming up. Our midterm will be at the end of the month. Actually, it's 2 weeks now. So that last week, basically, and I'll show you within Canvas, that's our midterm, and there's some requirements, and I'll remind you this week and next week and in 2 weeks as well. What you're responsible for, and essentially what's on the midterm. Essentially, it's the first 8 modules, and I just want to, provide some information now so it's not a big surprise. So with that, let me stop sharing and hit Canvas, and then reshare. Actually, I didn't have to stop sharing, but let me just reshare. Right, back into Canvas, you can all see our little Canvas environment. And I'm gonna have to do something, excuse me, about all of these components that are not in compliance, and we're supposed to have this all taken care of by spring, but that's not your problem, that's mine. I do have quite a bit to do. All right, so we're on module 7, group functions part 1. We will have a group functions part 2. And before I get into illustrating that, after that is our midterm, basically our midterm week. So we'll run through a few things on that Monday, which is the, actually, it's the 27th, yes. So we'll run through a few things on the 27th. The midterm will run from Thursday, October 30th through Sunday, November 2nd. And then we have class again. We have our class on November 3rd. So once again, the midterm will run from, basically it'll open October 30th at 8 a.m. and it will close November 2nd at midnight. So, and now I will remind you of this. Once you open it, you have to complete it. It does not save your progress. It does, or anything like that. It does require the Respondus Lockdown browser, and you have a Respondus Lockdown browser test. And I'll tell you all about that once. Primarily that week. That week, I'm going to talk about what's required for the midterm, and then we're all going to hopefully get our Respondus Lockdown browser testing out of the way. But anyway, so that's the midterm. So prepare yourself for that. A couple weeks away. No problem, right? Everyone's going to do great. All right. All right. So group functions, part 1. We started with, and our lecture and video will show up as usual. We do have videos normal, and I always want to check to make sure the links are good. Some of the group functions, some mid-max, average, and the count function, all, yeah. You'll be experts at group functions at this level, no problem. And then our practice queries, as usual, not as many, but all, especially if you want to do these variances or standard deviation, because you're number crunchers or whatever, have at it. Yeah, so that's your test queries, as usual. A little bit less to do this week as you prepare for that midterm. Anyway, And then your practice activities, only 2 sections, your practice and solutions to prep you for the assignments. And then, yes, we have, that's our solutions. And then we have our assignment on group functions. And I think this one only has 6. And try it, solve it, group functions, and count distinct NVL, and an extra page. So pretty light week. Should be no difficulties getting through this. So please, I would suggest getting it out of the way. And then the quiz as normal. And you've all been doing pretty good on the quizzes. I think this one's 8 questions. I think, I'm not sure. I'm not going to open it up. Well, that's it. That's all that you're required to do for this week. Kind of a light week, not too heavy. And I suppose we need kind of a break, at least for now. I can tell you right now, it'll pick up a little bit. The bottom or the second half, not the bottom, second half of the semester, a little bit. But yes, Diana agrees. You need a light week. Take a break, take a deep breath. Phew. See, kind of figure out what you've learned, what you haven't learned. But a light week is good. A light week is good for all of us. So it's good for me too. So I do far too many things, but I'm not complaining. I love what I do. All right. Any questions before or comments before I let you all go get back to your evening or continue your evening? Excuse me.
Bless
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. All right then. So thank you for your attendance and please take care and I will see you all next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Have a good day.
You too.